Why do we race? Is it to prove how fast we are? How far we can go? Do we race to find our place? To test our beliefs? To be part of something greater? To face fear? To know sacrifice? To grow stronger? To become immortal? In truth, there is no simple answer to why we race. There is only the fact that we always will.
Welcome to the Circuito Gijillo, a course that takes drivers from the shores of Copacabana Beach to the vistas of Corcovado Mountain. I'm here to give you your first look and first drive of the spectacular 2017 Ford GT on the colorful streets of Brazil's marvelous city. Your career spans 5 different volumes, each built around a different type of car passion. From hot hatchbacks and vintage sports cars to grand touring cars and formula racers, you will drive and collect the greatest cars in the world. But first, I'll guide you through a short 3-race qualifying series. Your first qualification race takes place at Lime Rock Park, known for its flowing elevation changes and rural setting. We've assembled a roster of truly iconic cars from the Super Street volume to use for qualifying. All these cars have been upgraded to be evenly matched, so choose the one that speaks to you, and we'll get started. Powered by Drivatar technology, each driver is as unique and competitive as the players who trained them. Every time you race, you win credits. Credits help you buy new cars, upgrades, and other special items that I'll show you later. You'll also earn experience points, or XP for short. XP increases your driver level and affinity level. I'll share more details on these in the coming races. Before you start the race, select Mods, and I'll introduce you to this powerful new feature. Mods give you a whole new way to fine-tune your experience. Whether you want to go even faster or raise the stakes, mods give you the tools to make it happen. Select the starter pack to open it and see what mods you get. Reveal your new mods here, then press A and I'll show you how to apply them. Here, you can choose which mods you'll use. Some mods are permanent, while others are good for only one race. Select an empty slot to apply your mod. You have successfully applied your first mod. Each time you increase your driver level, you'll win a prize spin. You've earned your first prize spin. You could win a credits windfall, mod packs, or even a brand new car. Every time you raise your car's manufacturer affinity level, you receive a credits reward. Congratulations! You've successfully completed the qualifying series. Welcome to the Super Street volume. Let's learn more about the cars of Super Street.
For most of us, our first, and sometimes only, taste of racing comes on the streets. If you love cars, this is where it all starts. In the empty parking areas, and on the city streets where you race your mates between stoplights. We do this in the very first cars we owned, or the ones we saved up for later. Then we fiddled with the engines and the suspension until they went faster, and added stripes and stickers so they looked faster too. It's the same around the world. whether it's on Japanese mountain roads, on Britain's back lanes, or America's superhighways. We're talking about affordable heroes, cars that bring performance to the people. Whether they're smoking around a parking lot or hammering along a city circuit you designed yourself. They aren't the most expensive, and they won't win every drag race. But they all prove one thing. You don't need $1 million to have a car with a big heart. Whether it's a sports sedan for business people, an SUV that has way more power than you need for the school run, or a lightweight, purpose-built track day car, you'll find it here. Every car in this eclectic group represents the very best of its breed. They're the very top of the tree. Some of these are pumped-up versions of everyday cars, bursting with power and often bulging at the seams. From classic 60s muscle to more modern sports cars, each car here truly represents the best driving experiences of their era. And, with the exception of the more extreme track toys, they show how far you can push a daily driver without sacrificing the comfy seats, soundproofing, and room for the whole family. These are the poster cars. The ones you had on your bedroom wall as a kid. Who knows, you might still have them on your wall. Because even if you're old enough to buy proper art in frames, it'll never look as good as the cars we have here. They're the ones we all dream of. The ones built in exotic places with top speeds and acceleration times that can literally take your breath away. Many of these cars are built with space-grade materials and push road car physics to the limits using race-derived technology. But even if you become immensely rich, you might still need to know the right people in the right places to be allowed to buy one. Others suit a more down-to-earth budget. But they all have a huge amount of power, and many will go way beyond 200 miles per hour. Even for the most natural-born racing drivers, it takes years of training and mental conditioning to master cars like these. They say the first car race happened as soon as the world's second car was built, and motorsport has been evolving ever since. From the historic sports car races of the 50s to the modern cutting-edge technology of the Formula E racing series. Many resemble cars you see on the roads, though they are merely lookalikes and are very different beasts to their road-going counterparts. But they do look a bit similar, and that's important because, to borrow a phrase from NASCAR, if you win on Sunday, you sell on Monday. These fire-breathing race cars compete in events across the world, where close-quarters racing often becomes a full contact sport on the road to victory. Here we are then, in the ultimate motorsport group. A world of impossible speed, mind-boggling forces, and the sort of hazards usually reserved for test pilots. Back in the 60s and 70s, there was no guarantee that a driver starting a race would still be around when it finished. Cars were high on speed, low on safety, and dripping with adrenaline. Thankfully, things have moved on, but with more safety comes more speed, as designers and engineers bend the rules of physics to save a micron here or a millisecond there. Everything on these machines is there, or rather not there, for a reason. Some are rolling experiments for mankind's most advanced technology, and they stretch the definition of car to its limit. Together they represent billions of dollars of investment, and they compete in the world's most famous and valuable races, from the banked corners of Indianapolis to the Mulsanne Strait at Le Mans.
You are now entered in the Challenger Series. Each circuit in this series will challenge different aspects of your car and your skill as a driver. Next, take on club-level circuits, perfect for amateur drivers to learn the ropes of efficient car control. Now, tour the most famous racetracks in the United States from coast to coast, representing the best racing in the country. Here, you'll take on the thrill and challenge of racing at night. Visibility is limited, and cooler temperatures affect how tires grip the track. The circuits in this series present a variety of challenges to even the most experienced driver. Tight wheel-to-wheel turns, blind crests, bumpy tarmac, and wide-open top-speed straights. These tracks have it all. European tracks are some of the oldest in the world, some carrying the traditions of racing for nearly a century. This next series highlights the best of these legendary circuits. Some of the very first auto races drove through fields, forests, and hilly countryside. The circuits in this series began as dirt roads and trails, evolving into exciting tracks with state-of-the-art race engineering. Significant elevation changes test a car's acceleration and braking, while hills and valleys limit visibility. The next series features oscillating circuits that test both car and driver. Built to the highest standards of professional racing, these tracks exist for top-level racing competition. Every corner is engineered, and safety technologies like runoffs, tire walls, and high-tech barriers are integral to their design. Rain has been called the great equalizer. Reduced visibility, scarce traction, and hydroplaning means driving quickly becomes more about feeling the road rather than pure power. The following series takes place on tracks known for their wet weather racing. This next series is all about speed. Acceleration is one thing, but keeping your momentum through sweeping corners is key, especially leading into the massive straights these tracks provide. Concentration and quick reflexes make all the difference between hitting top speed or hitting a wall. The southern United States is perfect for sports car racing. Temperate weather, scenic views, and plenty of space to put a track down anywhere you like. This next series takes place at venues featuring America's premier circuits. Each of the following tracks integrates all the special characteristics of the environment in which they exist, from frozen mountains to sunny beaches and everywhere in between. Trot the globe while racing on the world's most unique circuits. This is where racing started. Legends were forged on these famed circuits, known for dangerously high speeds and tricky corners. Get ready to drive through history. These tracks are modern, technical, and unforgiving, requiring the driver to be at the highest levels of proficiency. Modern heroes of motorsport are born here, conquering circuits engineered to push physics to the edge. Prepare yourself for the ultimate test of precision, reflexes, and speed.
2 doors on a small car. Lightweight, pokey, skinny-tired, rear-wheel drive, and affordable. Sounds simple, doesn't it? Yet it takes guts for a manufacturer to produce cars like these. Cars that take the demands of practical motoring and place them on the non-existent back seat. Because really, they're made for one thing: driving, even if you have nowhere to go. Japan, home of the noble art of drifting. Made famous by cult movies, manga comics, and console games, all of which celebrated the street racers who baited cops with midnight runs through big cities before escaping to twisty mountain roads in their homegrown coupes, slithering to freedom in clouds of tire smoke.
Based on that most useful of car layouts, the hatchback, these cars are all about power, performance, and, of course, practicality. Hot hatches are cars you can drive every day and in every way. Small and responsive, they're perfect for bombing around tight roads, and when you're done with that, you can use them for shopping trips and other boring things that get in the way of proper driving.
If you recognize the cars in this group, it's because you've seen them on TV, flying through icy forests or clinging to a cliff in some far-flung corner of the world. Based on competition rally cars, or at least inspired by them, they have 4-wheel drive, big turbochargers, and wings more suited to light aircraft. You feel like you could drive them anywhere, and that no matter how ambitiously you enter a corner, everything will be okay. Probably.
These are cars that pack big performance into a compact space, and they come from all over the world. Often they're the fastest versions of a particular model, and they squeeze every last drop of power from mass production engines. They also have more aggressive suspension to make them corner better, plus chunky body kits to help them fight the air and stand out from the others. The 60s and 70s were all about experimentation, and the cars were no different. Instead of relying on big V8s for performance, some manufacturers extracted as much power as possible from smaller engines and concentrated on making their cars fun, light, and good-looking. So these were things you could really throw around, which meant they inevitably found their way onto the track, paving the way for touring car racing as we know it today.
These are the sort of machines that, in the old days, would have emerged from secret skunkworks. Cars made by special departments and in-house tuners with motorsport expertise and a stash of weapons-grade parts. All of these machines push the limits of the models on which they're based, which means that for most companies, these are the fastest cars they make, full stop. If the 80s was a revolutionary time for the car world, the 90s and noughties were just as good. New materials and technologies meant manufacturers could build cars with stuff we'd only ever seen in motorsport. Flappy paddle gearboxes, twin-scroll turbochargers, lightweight composites. They shook up the racing world too and set the standard for sports cars as we know them today. These cars are future classics, but you can buy them now while they're still shiny. Underneath the tinted shades and smart suits, these executive heavyweights pack serious firepower. They might be large and luxurious, but they carry their weight well, thanks to magic suspension and electronic trickery that gets them around corners like cars weighing half as much. All this while boasting the sumptuous stuff a business person needs, including interiors made mostly of tree and cow. They have license plates and you can drive them on the road, but make no mistake, these are hardcore grade A track day weapons, and anything to make them road legal is of trivial concern. More importantly, they weigh about the same as a paper bag and have excellent power to weight figures. This means they accelerate like superbikes, and it's hard to imagine them losing to anything costing under 6 figures. They might have the ability to drive through pig's muck, but these SUVs are made by people who usually do sports cars, so they're more suited to apexes than agriculture. Like carving a sledgehammer into a machete, you wouldn't mess with the results, though they do make these power-crazed juggernauts rather entertaining to drive on a track, especially if you leave your braking to the last minute. It began with the bootleggers, who tuned their cars to try and outrun the cops. Their recipe was simple. They inserted a big engine in a small production car and put power above all else. Their creations were the ancestors of the American auto industry and later inspired the pony cars we fell in love with.
Meet the supercar killers. The cars that can hold their own against the world's most exotic machinery without sending your bank manager into cardiac arrest. With astonishing acceleration and enough grip to peel tarmac, they offer serious bang for your buck. And you might even see one in the real world, not just in music videos. With their big V12s and room for designer luggage, the cars in this group will cross whole countries without even noticing. Then, when you arrive in Monaco, you can do a lap of the Grand Prix track before parking outside a posh hotel with all the other billionaires. This is what Grand Tourers are for, after all. Fast, famous, rare, and expensive. These are the exotic GTs, the cars we gather around at motor shows, the ones with prancing horses and fighting bulls on their badges, machines with sharp edges and screaming engines that make you tingle. When these names are bounded around, the word supercar isn't far behind. They operate on the bleeding edge of physical possibility. Some are made in batches so small and at such dizzying expense that you have to be invited to buy one. Many combine batteries with petrol to make more power and use materials you'd usually find on a spaceship. All of which has led to a new ground-based space race and unfathomable top speeds. These aren't just the fastest cars of their time, they're the fastest cars ever. If modern hypercars walk the rules of physics with space-grade technology, then early supercars did it with brute force. There were no fluffy bits in sight, no ABS, no traction control, and nowhere to hide when things got a bit crashy, which they often did. Fueled by the 80s banking boom and power-crazed brokers, these machines were raw, exhilarating, and astonishingly fast, even by today's standards. For speed junkies born before base jumping and energy drinks were invented, motorsport was one of the only ways to get their fix. Many were combat veterans from World War II, the top guns of their era, who sought new ways to batter the enemy. And so they raced monstrously powerful lightweight contraptions with no seatbelts, which were probably more terrifying than the fighter planes they flew in the war.
Whereas the historic racers in the other group started with a clean sheet, the cars in this group follow much stricter rules. They might have started life as a fast road car, but from the wheels up, almost everything has been modified, so long as it stays within the law. Some companies will sell you one off the shelf and even organise a special championship so you can race against other identical cars. The level playing field means it all comes down to driver skill. If racing is supposed to be a non-contact sport, then nobody told these guys, because if you don't finish a touring car race with battle scars and a missing mirror, you're doing it wrong. They might look similar to everyday cars, but the shape is pretty much the only thing they have in common. Inside, they're stripped to the metal, the bodywork is replaced by beefy new panels, and unlike your mother's car, they spit flames from their exhausts. Big, loud, basic, and Australian. V8 supercars are loosely based on four-door sedans, and they only race down under, which makes them as unique as Aussie rules football or kangaroos. Mostly it's a straight choice between Ford or Holden, otherwise known as GM. But any manufacturer with a V8 engine can enter the ring, ready for a good old-fashioned bashing. In the olden days, motorsport was something you could smell a mile off. You had scorched rubber and petrol fumes and many fluids, some of them from the drivers. But this is the future, and this is a Formula E car, a completely electric space-grade single-seater with its own race series endorsed by the FIA. 1970s touring cars were beefed up and ready for a scrap, as were the drivers. The rules and regulations were interpreted in deeply creative ways, leading to flared fenders and swollen bodywork to make room for bulging engines that sent power through the roof. Not literally. As if that wasn't enough, wings and things were added to give these cars more aero than an F-15 fighter jet. In the 1950s, the rules of sports car racing changed, meaning teams could enter cars that for the first time weren't based on road-going equivalents. This meant they could experiment with radical new designs and materials, which opened the door for exotic endurance races that were as beautiful as they were fast, and they became instant classics.
Cars like these are mostly to be found at Le Mans and other round-the-clock races where, despite giving 100% for hour after hour, they can't break down or crash. And sometimes that's easier said than done. They're called prototypes because they're not based on anything else, and because they feature cutting-edge technology. Some are even named after robots, like Audi's hybrid R18 e-tron. IndyCar, America's ultimate single-seater championship, in which cars must somehow remain grounded while doing 230 miles per hour on a banked oval. That makes it the world's fastest racing series. So aerodynamics is king, which is why these look unlike any other single-seaters in the world. In fact, every team must use a standard Dallara chassis, but can choose between a Chevrolet or a Honda engine. This is it. The pinnacle of all automotive technology. The fastest, grippiest, most scientifically serious cars on the planet. Designed by people with giant brains who take the rules of nature, crumple them up, and write new ones. This is a world where the gap between heroism and humiliation is measured in microseconds, and where phantom forces are fought by drivers with superhuman reactions. Can-Am stood for Canadian American because that's where the races happened. There were virtually no rules, so the cars were wild, dangerous and experimental, often ridiculously so. Wings were everywhere, and some cars even had fans on the bottom to suck them onto the road. Almost all of them were made by the sort of men who, in a parallel universe, would be locked in a laboratory making Frankenstein monsters. 1970s Grand Prix racing was only for the brave. It was a time when technology sometimes overtook man's ability to tame it, a fact that was tragically proven too many times. The 1976 Grand Prix season was dominated by the title fight between James Hunt and Niki Lauda, and the battle almost cost Lauda his life. It was the era when wings appeared at Grand Prix for the first time, when engines moved to the middle, and when Britannia ruled. The single-seat cars were light, but flimsy, and the margin between risk and reward was often way too close for comfort. But they were fast, as were the heroes who drove them, some of whom paid the ultimate price to help shape Grand Prix racing as we know it today.
In Bondurant Autocross, the idea is to make it around an agility course in the fastest possible time. The course is outlined with cone gates, which you must not hit or you will get a time penalty. It's an exercise in composure, surgical driving, and the ultimate test of your handling skills. Don't forget that sometimes slower is better. The problem with many forms of motor racing is that the fastest car usually wins. In these showcases, we have leveled the playing field, and everybody is in the same car. It all comes down to raw driving skill and determination. Do you have what it takes to win the race? In the old days, motor racing was a matter of life or death. Drivers, like men who went to war, might never come back from the front line. Others would make it through, only to be sent on new missions with ever more powerful weapons. And just like the arms race between superpowers, car manufacturers would battle for supremacy on the track. Here, you can step back in time and see for yourself what it was like to live in this thrilling era, as we relive some of racing's most famous moments and celebrate the people who made them. The Stig, Top Gear's tame racing driver, is an odd sort. You'd think he would be great at Forza, but tragically, he doesn't know how to play video games at all. But fear not, because we have the next best thing. No, it's not the Stig. It's the Stig's digital cousin. After diagnostic tests and some extensive probing, he's been found to be identical to the real Stig in every way. Except for one. There's a glitch in the code which makes it possible to beat him. In these events, you'll both have identical cars and race one-on-one to prove who's best. There's a chance you might even finish first, but only if you're really, really good. Everyone has their favorites. The kind of loyalty, either fierce or subtle, that results in dinner-table one-upmanship, arguments on the internet, and manufacturer-branded apparel. After all, the car you like, that's the best one, surely. Time to settle this battle of the brands in a shootout to determine once and for all who leads the pack and who trails in their dust. There is nothing as taxing as endurance racing. Drivers and cars run for impossibly long distances, sometimes for 24 hours straight, stopping only for fuel, new tires, and to change drivers. In these showcases, you can drive many types of car, all designed and built to survive these grueling long-distance races. You'll have to keep an eye on your mirrors and your energy levels, if you're to make it through these events in one piece. In these events, you will be driving a very fast car and racing against older but significant models from the same manufacturer. You have the more powerful and faster car, but they have a head start. Can you pass the older cars and win the race before you run out of road? In these showcase events, overtaking isn't just encouraged, it's the whole point of the game, and you'll be rewarded for passing as many cars as possible before the end of the race. To help with this, you'll be armed with the fastest cars in the world, so absolutely nothing should be able to catch you. The motorsport pyramid is rocky and steep, and very few drivers make it to the very top. Only they know what it's like to race at Le Mans, or Indianapolis, or Bathurst, in cars tailor-made for the occasion. In these showcases, you can get one step closer to experiencing these races and glimpse into the life of a professional racing driver. Here you'll drive the world's greatest race cars on some of the most famous circuits in international racing. Welcome to the Top Gear Showcases, which, as you'd expect, contain many facts and lots of sensible advice, such as how to play 10-pin bowling without leaving the car, and if you've ever wanted to set a lap time on the Top Gear test track in some of the fastest cars ever to lap it, well, it's your lucky day.
You will be driving the 2015 Chevrolet Corvette Z06. Use the power of the supercharged V8 to your advantage on the straights, and don't overdo it during tight cornering.
You'll be driving the 2015 Mercedes-Benz AMG GTS. It's wide and relatively heavy, so make sure you're completing all your hard braking in a straight line, and make sure the vehicle's pointed to the apex prior to accelerating. You can make up for those slow corners with the speed on the straight. You'll be driving the 2016 Mazda MX-5. This lower horsepower, lightweight car handles extremely well, so you can carry a lot of momentum into the corner, which in turn will help you with that corner exit speed. In this event, you'll be driving the 2014 Volkswagen Golf R. Its all-wheel drive creates good traction, but you should brake hard prior to turn-in to avoid understeer. You'll be driving the 2014 BAC Mono. This is a lightweight and powerful vehicle. The vehicle will test your reaction time and vision skills. Establish points of reference on the track to help you with your performance and consistency.
You will race a Mazda MX-5 Cup Spec against a field of identical Cup cars at Laguna Seca. You will race a Formula Ford single-seater against a field of identical cars at Hockenheim. You will race an Ariel Atom against a field of identical cars at Catalunya. You will race an Ultima GTR 720 against a field of identical cars at Monza. You will race a Lotus 211 against a field of identical cars at Lime Rock. You will race a Caterham R500 against a field of identical cars at Silverstone. You will race a Radical SR8 RX against a field of identical cars at Brands Hatch. Who'll race a Lotus E23 single-seater against a field of identical cars at Yas Marina?
In the late 1920s, a team of British aristocrats arrived at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. Among them was a man named Wolf Bonato. Wolf and his chums called themselves the Bentley Boys, and they were the ultimate examples of gentleman drivers, dueling with other wealthy speed hunters, piloting gigantic machines often powered by massive aeroplane engines. These steely-eyed heroes raced on the newly built racetracks of America and Europe, such as the legendary Spa circuit in Belgium, reaching speeds of 170 plus, in an era when crash protection consisted of a leather hat, a pair of goggles, and a simply enormous moustache.
The thing about American cars is that everyone thinks they can only go straight. Have they forgotten about Trans Am? Trans Am took beefed up versions of production muscle cars and raced them at tracks such as Laguna Seca, Watkins Glen, road courses revered for their challenging corners the world over. Trans Am racing attracted the finest drivers from all over the world. The legendary Dan Gurney, Sam Posey, even Paul Newman all raced in the Trans Am series to great success. These cars set records at tracks around the country, and even today, when you go to places like Pebble Beach or high-end auctions, you'll find that original Trans Am cars are some of the most valuable muscle cars on the planet.
Grand Prix racing in the 70s will be remembered by many for the brutal, sometimes bloody rivalry between James Hunt and Niki Lauda. It was a battle that almost cost Lauda his life in a fiery crash at Nürburgring in '76, which would scar Lauda and motorsport forever. Meanwhile, Lotus was putting Mario Andretti on the podium, as other teams did everything they could to catch up. And when I say everything, I mean everything, which is how come Tyrrell came up with a six-wheel racing car which they believed would give them some advantage. These were the party years. The action on track was haunted by the spectre of death, but when things went well, it felt good to be alive.
Can-Am stood for Canadian American because that's where the races happened. And in motorsport language, it was a Formula Libre, which in layman's terms means anything goes. The result was a wild, all-you-can-eat buffet of engines and aerodynamics, leading to an incredible arms race and cars that topped 1,500 horsepower in qualifying trim. Engine size was unlimited and cars could be as light as you liked, so the typical team would pair a giant big block Chevy V8 to a tiny nimble chassis to give a power-to-weight figure that would make your hair curl. To tame these things around challenging road courses like Lime Rock demanded the nerve of a bomb disposal expert and the skill of a test pilot. Thankfully, drivers such as Bruce McLaren had both.
Grand Prix racing changed forever in the 60s as the big, brutal cars of the 1950s were swept away as teams started to focus on lightness and agility. The biggest change was the layout, with the engine moved behind the driver to make the cars more nimble and, as it turned out, much more of a handful to drive. In an era before everyone understood downforce, grip came largely from the tires, and when that grip disappeared, the results were never pretty. But the biggest revolution came in 1967, when Cosworth introduced the spectacularly successful DFV engine, a compact 3-litre V8 that would utterly dominate racing for the next decade, no matter which car it was attached to. When it began in the 1950s, the World Sports Car Championship was made up of many legendary events. There were classic road races, such as the Mille Miglia and the Targa Florio, and track events at circuits like Silverstone and Monza. For the first time, cars were no longer based on road-going equivalents. This meant teams could experiment with radical designs and exotic materials. As a result, big names like Ferrari, Mercedes, and Aston Martin all went to war. And to represent them in battle, they employed some of the greatest drivers who ever raced. Men like Juan Manuel Fangio and Sterling Moss, who stared at death for mile after mile at a time when crash testing meant doing it for real.
In 1963, secret meetings took place between Ford and Ferrari, and the American giant seemed certain to buy up the famous Italian supercar maker. Except the deal never went through, simply because, in the end, Enzo Ferrari refused to sell. Some say he never intended to, that the meetings were just a tease. Whatever the truth, Henry Ford Jr. was livid and vowed to take revenge. To that end, he ordered his people to build a car that would strike Ferrari where it hurt most, at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. That car was the magnificent GT40, and in 1966, it gave Ford his wish as 3 of them crossed the line in flying formation, taking the top 3 positions. None of Enzo's cars made it to the end of the race.
In 1988, Roger Dorchi reached 251 miles an hour on the Mulsanne Straight at Le Mans. This was before they put a chicane in the middle, forcing everyone to slow down, and meaning such speeds would never be seen again. Back in those days, the rulebook was thin, and that meant teams were free to innovate and spend millions of dollars on new technologies. The cars were low and light, and the drivers were squeezed into tiny cockpits to leave more room for the engine and gearbox behind. The view outside, from inside a helmet don't forget, is very limited, and invariably the job in hand is to race these cars sometimes inches from one another at speeds over 200 miles an hour, often for hours at a time.
The recipe for a Group 5 car went something like this. Take an ordinary production car, peel off the bodywork, replace the chassis with a stronger one, and while you're at it, throw out the engine. Now start putting it back together, leaving out frivolous things like airbags. Insert a new engine, preferably with a turbocharger, and cover the whole lot with new bodywork, remembering the massive flared arches. What you have now is a silhouette racer, a cartoonish version of the original that stretches the word related to breaking point. This is what Group 5 and IMSA was all about. Extreme GTs that required a deep breath before opening the throttle. And what better place to drive these brutes than Watkins Glen, one of America's most punishing racetracks.
Some say he thinks it speeds of 50 megabytes per second, and that his USB slot isn't where it's supposed to be. All we know is he's not the Stig, he's the Stig's digital cousin. Some say he's terrified of clouds and that he thinks Blu-ray is an actual person. All we know is he's not the Stig, he's the Stig's digital cousin. Some say he's the result of an unfortunate binary accident and that there's a glitch in his DNA. All we know is he's not the Stig, he's the Stig's digital cousin. Some say his firewall is 10 feet high and that he's completely invisible on webcam. All we know is he's not the Stig, he's the Stig's digital cousin. Some say he hangs his laundry up with JPEGs and that he thinks Bluetooth is a pirate. All we know is he's not the Stig, he's the Stig's digital cousin. Some say his search history is illegal in 9 countries and that he's allergic to spam. All we know is he's not the Stig, he's the Stig's digital cousin. Some say that his dongle is surprisingly large and that he has an emoticon of his face on his face. All we know is he's not the Stig, he's the Stig's digital cousin. Some say you can rearrange the letters in his name and spell QWERTY, and that he sold his last pixel on the internet. All we know is he's not the Stig. He's the Stig's digital cousin. Some say his cookie policy involves baking, and that he keeps his mouse in a small box. All we know is he's not the Stig. He's the Stig's digital cousin. Some say the soles of his feet are made of silicon, and that he can go 3 days without an update. All we know is he's not the Stig. He's the Stig's digital cousin.
Time to prove which Ultimate Sport Compact is the fastest around Watkins Glen. Time to prove which Sport GT is the fastest around Sebring. Time to prove which exotic GT is the fastest around Monza. Time to prove which hypercar is the fastest around Le Mans. Time to prove which sport icon is the fastest around Hockenheim.
In this event, we're going to give you 3 of America's best track cars, and we're going to put you up on one of America's finest circuits. The casual enthusiast would be happy to tell you that the golden age of muscle cars was the late 1960s and early 70s. But if you look at the cars they're selling us today, you get more for your money than ever before. If you ask me, I say the golden age of muscle cars is right now. But is it about the car or is it about the driver? Time for you to find out.
Time to prove which track day toy is the fastest around Brands Hatch.
The extremely bumpy surface and hot Florida weather make the 12 hours of Sebring an excellent reliability test for both man and machine. The Nürburgring is one of the most varied circuits in the world. During the 24-hour race, drivers must know every inch of the track to avoid costly mistakes. Road Atlanta is the home of the Petite Le Mans. This multi-class race lasting 10 hours captures the spirit of the 24 hours of Le Mans, but on a smaller scale. The prestigious Daytona International Speedway features high-banked corners for maximum downforce at top speed, testing the limits of both car and driver.
What makes the Indy 500 so special is really the entire month. The month of May is everything to IndyCar racing. You want to be the best. You want to be peaking with your team and as yourself as a driver at that time. Everything that you've worked for boils down to the Indianapolis 500. It is our largest race of the year. It's everything that we put our work into, and it's where we want to have the most success.
Les 24 heures du Mans, c'est la course d'endurance la plus connue au monde. Plusieurs catégories de véhicules s'y affrontent simultanément.
The Circuit de Catalunya has high and low speed corners on a bumpy surface, making for one of the most mechanically and physically taxing racetracks in the world. The Circuit de Spa-Francorchamps, nestled within the Ardennes forest, is notoriously fast and dangerous. The uphill Radillon, after the infamous Eau Rouge, ends in a blind summit, so taking it at speed is dangerous, but necessary.
Since 1963, the Bathurst 1000 has been captivating drivers and race fans from Australia and all over the world. The October Classic is a race that makes you famous. Peter Brock became the most recognised driver in Australia for winning it more than anyone else. A record 9 times. It's 6.5 hours of racing flat out up and down Mount Panorama. And it's the mountain that usually decides who wins or comes up short.
Several generations of the Ford Mustang on the Watkins Glen circuit, driving a 2017 Ford GT. Past previous generations of V12 Lamborghini models on the Monza circuit, driving a Lamborghini Aventador.
In this event, we're going to put you in a BMW M3 GTR among a field of historic M3s. The BMW M3 has always been a perfectly well-rounded vehicle, comfortable enough to take to work or take the kids to school, practical enough to go out and get groceries, and yet fast enough to win races on the weekends and fun enough to be constantly entertaining on a weekday backroad jaunt. In this event, we are going to put you in the 2015 Corvette C7R race car, and you're going to race against nearly all of the Corvette's significant past. The Corvette is America's sports car representation to the world. It features a lightweight design, simple but effective drivetrain, great power to weight ratio, and always puts down good numbers on the track. If you ask me, there is no sound on planet Earth more glorious than a Ferrari V12 wailing away at a full clip. There has never been a time in Ferrari's history where they did not produce a 12-cylinder engine. And in this event, we're going to put you behind the wheel of the greatest V12 road car of them all, the LaFerrari.
Drive the Ford GT as quickly as possible through Sebring. Drive the Ultima GTR 720 as quickly as possible through Mount Panorama Circuit at Bathurst. Drive the Ferrari LaFerrari as quickly as possible through Monza. Drive the Radical SR8 RX as quickly as possible through Silverstone.
IndyCar, America's ultimate single-seater championship, in which cars must somehow remain grounded while doing 230 miles per hour on a banked oval. So aerodynamics is king, which is why these look unlike any other single-seaters in the world. In fact, every team must use a standard Dallara chassis, but can choose between a Chevrolet or Honda engine.
The high-speed Spa circuit requires laser-sharp accuracy and lightning-fast reflexes, especially at night when lack of visibility becomes a factor. The famous Long Beach street circuit is challenging in any race car. But behind the wheel of a new Formula E single-seater, the demands on the driver are even greater. But keep an eye in those mirrors, because you won't hear them coming. Racing at 200 miles an hour on the high banks at Daytona is very dangerous, especially in a Daytona prototype when night falls and visibility is limited.
Pendant les 24 heures du Mans, à la tombée de la nuit, les pilotes de prototypes doivent non seulement maintenir leur vitesse, mais également faire attention aux voitures de catégorie plus lente sur la piste.
Touring car racing is door-to-door action at close quarters, and made even more difficult with the typical British weather here at Brands Hatch. Rain at Sebring, combined with the rough terrain of the track, causes unpredictable and dangerous situations. Watch out for pooling water, which can cause you to hydroplane. Fight for every inch of traction on the wet track of the Nürburgring Grand Prix circuit. Use all the road, but make sure to account for reduced visibility and braking distance.
Racing around Mount Panorama at Bathurst is all about respect. This is an unforgiving piece of tarmac, built in the days where sand traps, chicanes and safety barriers weren't even part of our game. Expect the unexpected the second you hit this racetrack. Peter Brock used to say great racetracks have got consequences, and that's Mount Panorama.
Balance and precision is key to racing Spa in the rain. The reduced traction and high speed of a GT car can easily get you into trouble. Driving under the high-tech lights at Yas Marina in one of the world's most advanced Grand Prix cars is considered by many to be the pinnacle of motorsport. A 12-hour race at Sebring is as demanding as a 24-hour race anywhere else. High traffic and limited night visibility makes driving treacherous, especially in those rougher corners. The Nürburgring is known for being one of the most complex circuits in the world, with hundreds of corners and only a handful of those lit. So when night falls in this endurance race, the challenge becomes much more intense.
Car bowling is a deceptively simple idea. In fact, it's pretty much like normal bowling, but without the slippery floor and ugly shoes. We've positioned some bowling pins around the Top Gear track. It's your job to knock them down by driving around as sideways as possible with lots of smoke pouring off your tires.
Just because a car is slow doesn't mean it can't be a champion. Scramble to lead the pack while racing cars that are classic, rare, or just plain strange. These are the underdogs.
Some say his lungs are permanently inflated to 1,000 psi, and that all of his thoughts are in Dutch. All we know is he's called the Stig. And over the years, he's thrashed the world's fastest cars around our track. In this challenge, you can choose from the best of them and set your own time around the Top Gear track. How close can you get to the Stig? There's only one way to find out. If you drive like this in real life, you'll soon have an awkward conversation with a traffic officer, followed by an even more awkward conversation with your hairy new cellmate. Here, overtaking isn't just encouraged, It's the whole point of the game, and you'll be rewarded for passing as many cars as possible, unless, of course, you simply wreck everything.